I want y'all to just do your best to pretend like the camera's not here. Get out of your system now. Everyone wave. Yeah. All right, that's the last one we're going to do. Everyone please in front of the classroom. So we're going to go ahead and get started today. Everybody please open up your Chromebooks and go to the announcement for today. So today is Monday. So everyone go up here, announcements. For Monday, this is February 21st. And I want you guys to, you know the drill. Click this link, make a copy of your new Unit 12 digital notebook. So hit make a copy. You guys know the drill. Label it with your name, Unit 12 digital notebook. And then if you want, you can also bookmark it. Keep it up at the top of your screen. All right. So when y'all get here, this is what she looks like. Her in all of her glory. All right, your new digital notebook. So when we look here, just to give you guys a little tour, a little roadmap. This is slide 1. This is your cover. So while other people are getting established and getting their notebooks downloaded and stuff like that, those of you guys who need something to do, please put your name in your class period, and then you can also write down here what I already know about World War I. So write anything that you know, and then what I want to know about World War II. Sorry, I said 1, I meant 2. So what you already know about World War II and what you want to know about World War II. Okay? So while some of y'all are getting downloaded and labeling your notebooks, and I want you guys to work on that for the next 30 seconds. What's up, Bryson? So to start with you, one yeah. So you guys are gonna write these in a digital notebook. What you already know, what you want to know.
I know too much.
I don't care. We're doing World War II today.
I know too much.
We'll take care of the
Did it?
war or Great
Thank you.
Depression later. I know they said we would.
All right, everybody.
Before World War I.
So,
World War I, we
in the
not
same
went to
vein as asking this question on slide 1, what do I already know about World War II? I want to know what you know so that we can move forward and I'm not telling you stuff you already know. Yeah? So I want to see where you're at. I want to know what you've heard, what you've learned previously, and where you're coming from so that our lessons can be better, right? So I want to know what you know. So what you're going to do is if you go down here, past your table of contents, past the vocabulary sheet that we're going to talk about in a minute, on slide 6, this is where we're going to be today. Okay, this is where we're camping out, slide 6. So if y'all click this link right here to Pear Deck, it's an anonymous answer platform. So I'm going to ask you guys a question in a minute, and you guys are going to do the game code and the whole 9 yards, okay? And it's going to give you an opportunity to type out an answer, but it's not going to have your name on it or anything, so it's anonymous. And so I want you guys to click on that link, and the question that I'm asking is, what do you know about World War II? I want to know what you know, just word vomit, like I'm talking names, dates, anything that you know. It doesn't have to be in full sentences. You guys can just write random words. I just need to know what you know, not the video, but we're working on the other link right now. So when I open this up, it's going to give you all a game code. So I want you to click on that link, and you're going to have a game code, which is this. The link over here. This right here. Right there in the yellow box. The Pear Deck, P-E-A-R, like the fruit deck. Hit this link right here. All right, guys, up here. Need your attention. Pear Deck is up here. Hey, if y'all keep pushing it, you're not going to get your 2 rows and your score sheet signed. I'm going to sign 2 sheets and 2 rows of your score sheet if you guys do well today. Okay? So, Pear Deck. This link up here, it's going to open up, and this is going to be your game code for today. So I want y'all to go ahead and enter WGGCAB. So, nope, no spaces. Just type that in. Warm grapes gladly conduct acidic bandanas. Because that's a sentence that makes sense. That sentence represents all the letters in game code. So WGGCAB. Everyone, give me a thumbs up when you're in. Yeah? All set? Jonas, are you in? Yeah? Okay. Bryson, are you in? Yeah? Okay, great. We're going to go ahead and get started. So when I hit play, I want you guys to type in the little text box there everything you know about World War II. Everything you know. All right? Let's go ahead and get started.
What if I don't know anything? What if I don't know anything?
That's okay too.
What was the question?
Just give me anything you got.
About World War II.
Yep, just anything that you know. So people, names, places, the year, if you know any years. You can talk about any battles that you know about,
I know
any like concepts or ideologies or anything like that. Alright, so, like I said, these are anonymous. I don't know who's typing what, but while you guys are typing, I'm going to read some of these off. So it says it was from 1939 to 1945, which is correct. So these are in the late 1930s into the 40s. They said how it ended. Let's see here. The Germans are very violent. So you're right, it does involve Germany as one of the primary countries that were involved in the conflict and things like that. So someone said gas mask. So yeah, that's probably an element of the battle that we see there. So remember, there's a difference between World War I and World War II. So we've already talked about World War I, which also involved Germany, right? We talked about that like 2 units ago. So we were in World War I, then we went to the Roaring '20s, and then we went on to the Great Depression. Yeah? So when we talk about World War I, that had a lot to do with like gas masks and trench warfare and things like that, but this is going to be different. So let's see here. I'm seeing a lot of stuff about the Nazis. I'm seeing a lot about Hitler and Germany.
The middle.
Alright.
World War II.
Hey, yo, up here, guys. So those of us who don't know much about it, that's great, because we're going to
How
learn,
do you
right?
put emojis?
Yeah.
Alright, great. So it's talking about the Jewish people, and we're going to talk today about fascism and what that did and how it impacted the Jewish people, right? And we're going to talk about, some of us know what the Holocaust is. When we think about World War II, those are things we're going to be discussing next week. And those are really big, important conversations. And so today, we're going to be covering the causes of World War II, and then we're going to enter into some of the more specifics later. So let's see here. Pacific War, yes, a lot of it was conducted in the Pacific, so it was very much a naval war, right? So Navy, so like the ships and battleships and planes and stuff like that, and it was very much a war fought on the ocean. So the Pacific War is a really big part of it. The Battle of Midway was a big battle, and we're going to be discussing that next week as well. This is really great, guys. So this is kind of like what your brains are looking like right now. There's all these little text bubbles, right, popping up and things that don't really make much sense right now. But we're going to take all these things that you know, and we're going to make sense of it. No, it's all good. We're going to be moving on. All right, so I want y'all to please open up slide 6 for me. So if you look here, actually I'm going to X out. So what we're going to do first is like when we're skimming a book before we read it in depth, we're going to skim first and get an overview. And then we're going to move on to the specifics. So we're going to watch a 2-minute video that recaps everything that we're going to be learning today. And then we're going to get into the specifics of it. All right? Bear with me for a second because I'm going to change the subtitles of this video before we get started. In 1 second. Actually, it's not going to let me do that. So these subtitles are actually in Greek, but the text in the audio of the video matches. So if you have an issue like interpreting that information, then it's going to be verbally delivered to you as well. So the closed captioning is in Greek, so you're not going to be able to read it, and I apologize, but I can't fix it. So, actually, oh, I can't fix it.
After roughly 20 years of peace, the world went to war for a second time. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be exploring how World War II began. The Second World War is considered a direct result of the First World War due to unresolved tensions and anger from that conflict. However, the Great Depression of the 1930s was another factor that led to bitterness and a shift in public attitudes towards strict dictatorships. World War I also facilitated the rise of Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party. Hitler's allies in Italy and Japan also acted aggressively with the hope of expanding their territories. Hostilities by these countries towards the communism of the Soviet Union was just another factor that helped lead to war. In fact, a number of ideologies helped spark the war. Aggressive expansionism by countries like Germany and Italy, fascist dictatorships, and deep-seated racism were all considered contributing factors. This racism was mostly in Germany, where the Nazis believed the Aryan race was the master race and superior to the Slavic people. The countries that eventually formed the Allied Alliance acted passively in the face of the Axis threat. This was partly out of sympathy, partly out of guilt because of the Treaty of Versailles that blamed the Germans for World War I, and partly because countries like Britain underestimated Hitler. Meanwhile, the League of Nations proved itself ineffective in the fight to keep the peace. A few months after Japan withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933, Germany did the same. In 1935, Germany violated the Treaty of Versailles by introducing mandatory military conscription and by beginning rearmament. That country continued to violate the treaty in the years that followed. In fact, in 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland. It was around this time Nazi Germany formed their important alliance with Italy. Soon after, the two countries offered support to the separatist movement in the Spanish Civil War, while the existing government was supported by the Soviet Union. These events foreshadowed the Second World War, as both sides were testing different methods and weapons of battle. One specific event that foretold the horrors of World War II was the April 1937 bombing of Guernica. By 1938, Hitler's motives were clearer. In a move referred to as the Anschluss, the Nazis annexed Austria into Germany, despite the fact this also violated the Treaty of Versailles. Later that year, Hitler was appeased by both Britain and France when they signed the Munich Agreement. This allowed Hitler to overtake a German-speaking section of Czechoslovakia in order to keep the peace. In August 1939, Nazi Germany signed a peace treaty with the Soviet Union. However, the first official event of World War II followed soon after. Due to long-standing tensions, Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. Britain and France warned Germany that should the troops not withdraw, war was imminent. When the Nazis did nothing, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II officially began.
Alright, y'all can open up your Chromebooks again. Okay, back to your digital notebook. Everybody please go on to slide 6 for me. So, that video gave us an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Jonas, could you grab that light for me, please? Thank you. So, today we're going to be discussing the economic and political causes of World War II. Okay, so when we think about World War II, when we did that activity a couple minutes ago, a lot of y'all were talking about things that had to do with the conflict and like the battles and the war part of World War II, right? Which is usually the first thing that we think about, but this stage was set for war well before any of the battles ever started. And a lot of those causes came from economics, right? So when we think about World War I, can anybody give me some snippets about what we remember about World War I? You're welcome. Anything at all? Does anyone remember what the treaty was at the end of World War I? Yeah, Versailles. So the Treaty of Versailles is really important when we talk about today, when we talk about World War II. So essentially what ended up happening was at the end of World War I, and I'm just going to refresh your memory on this because you guys haven't taught this before a couple weeks ago. At the end of World War I, all of the other nations involved in the war blamed Germany for what had happened, right? For starting the war and for prolonging it and making it drag on. And so what they ended up doing was they forced Germany to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which basically gave them full responsibility for the war and pegged a lot of war debt on them, okay? So we talk about reparation taxes. So reparation kind of sounds like repairs, right? So they were taxed, I believe it was $3 billion in reparation costs after the war to repair the land that had been lost and all the damages that had happened during World War I. So when we exited as a global platform out of World War I, we went into the Roaring 20s, right? And then we went into the Great Depression, and now we're back in World War II, okay? So that's the way that went. We went World War I, Roaring 20s, and then we went into the Depression, right? And now we're here in World War II. So what ended up happening was after the Treaty of Versailles, obviously all of the nations were suffering from what happened in World War I, but Germany suffered the most because they were under extreme economic strain all of a sudden. They had all of that debt to pay back, right? And so I believe it was $3 billion that they were paying back after the Treaty of Versailles. And so just how we experienced in the Great Depression, they experienced it right out of World War I, okay? So we had a time of prosperity and of money and of wealth and industry and entertainment before we went back into our Great Depression, right? But Germany went straight into it because all of a sudden they were in so much debt, right? So that's number one, economic causes. World War I debt owed by Germany, right? That debt caused them to suffer extremely on an economic front. And so Germany, just like how some of y'all asked during our Great Depression unit, our last unit, why don't you just print more money, right? That was a question some of you guys had. So what happens is when you print more money, things don't get better, they actually get worse. So when you print more money, inflation happens. Is that what you were gonna bring up? Yeah. So inflation is when you print a ton of money and you have way too much money in the system, right? And so the dollar is worth less because you have so many. What'd you say? Yeah. So prices go up and all of that stuff. And so a great imagery we can get is at this time, there was so much inflation, and high inflation is number 3 over there on economic causes, and we'll come back to depression in a second, but inflation was so bad in Germany after the Treaty of Versailles was signed that like a wheelbarrow full of cash could barely buy you a loaf of bread. Yeah, so like from me to you, right, like a big bucket, right, full of cold hard German cash would hardly buy you a loaf of bread. Because prices were so high, you know, like Sophia just said. So prices were incredibly high. The dollar was essentially worthless. People were using their money to start fire. Like they were burning their money because it was more useful as kindling for their fire than it was to even buy anything. So people were trading for stuff instead of buying it, using money, and all of these things. So World War I debt owed by Germany sent them into an extreme economic depression. And then worldwide depression, like we said, when we were talking about our Great Depression, it wasn't just the United States, it was everybody, right? We talked about high tariffs and taxes, strangled international trade. We did this hand motions to remember that it wasn't just the US, that it was a global international depression, right? And so it didn't just impact Germany, it impacted all of the countries who were involved in World War I. So that's our cause number 2. Number 3, what'd you say? Number 2? Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, I meant World War II. If you hear me say World War I, unless we're talking about the Treaty of Versailles, it was a mistake. You pointed out to me. I'm sorry. All right, so number 3, high inflation. German money was essentially worthless. Number 4, massive unemployment. Just like how we saw in our Great Depression, right? People were having trouble finding jobs and keeping those jobs and getting paid properly. What was that, Sophia? Yeah, kind of like now. So now we have like a margin of unemployment in America now. But remember when we talked about the Great Depression here in America, it was 25% unemployment, which is the highest it's ever been here in America, right? And Germany was suffering the same thing. So just like how our Great Depression impacted us in America, imagine Germany having an identical situation, which is what was going on there. So I want y'all to repeat these back to me. Economic causes, war debt owed by Germany.
War debt owed by Germany.
Yeah, war debt owed by Germany.
War debt owed by Germany.
Perfect. All right, number 2, worldwide depression.
Worldwide depression.
You got it. Number 3, high inflation.
High inflation.
Number 4, massive unemployment.
Massive unemployment.
Beautiful. Okay, so when we think about economics, okay, so that was a big deal. That was like setting the stage, right? So Germany was upset with their government for signing the Treaty of Versailles, even though they were forced to. Because when they signed the Treaty of Versailles, the economic system in Germany collapsed, right? And so, just like how in America during the Great Depression, when we were having all sorts of economic issues, when we talked in our last unit about how we wanted Hoover out of office and we wanted FDR in office, right? So when you're having massive economic issues, normally we look to the government and a change in leadership to give us those things, right? So we think the person in charge, if that changes, maybe our economic situation will change. So Germany was really upset with our government for allowing this to happen to them because it was affecting them and their families. They couldn't find jobs, money was useless, all of that stuff. And so what ended up happening was this economic issue turned into a political issue over time, because when you're struggling economically, you blame your government and you blame your leadership. So what ended up happening was a lot of the people that we know to be involved with World War II, Adolf Hitler comes to mind, right? He's one of the big figureheads of World War II. We often think about him as like the supervillain of World War II, right? And so that's easy to say, but there are others as well that were just like him. And so what these men did, we call them the Axis powers. And we're gonna get to this in a second, but just for the sake of imagery here, we have 3 men who took advantage of the economic situation in their countries, right? We have Japan, Italy, and Germany. And so in these 3 countries, okay, there was a really poor economic situation happening, not just in Germany, but also in Italy and also in Japan. So what these men did was they took advantage of this, and so they saw people demanding a change in leadership, and they decided to run for office, step into leadership positions. And so when they got into those positions, they took over as more of a dictator role than an elected official. So for instance, like we know Adolf Hitler, he was like a World War I, like war hero. He had medals, he served in World War I. I think he was like a lieutenant or something like that, or a corporal. I think he was a corporal. So he climbed the ladder up into government, okay, during the Depression. And so just like how we wanted FDR instead of Hoover, someone was like, man, get that guy out of here. We want Adolf Hitler in instead. Because he's telling us he's gonna do something different. He's telling us he's gonna call for change, he's gonna change the economic situation. And so just like Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini took over, just as Hideki Toyo, right, in Japan. And so these three men take advantage of the economic situation and turn it into a political one by taking over politically to fix the economic issues or telling people they were just to get into power, right? And so when we think about these men, they took over in their governments, taking advantage of the economic situation, and they turned it into a political one, right? So number one down there says conquest of neighboring nations by Japan, Italy, Germany. J-I-G, okay? Everyone say jig.
Yeah.
All right, does anyone know what a jig is? Yeah.
It's like a dance.
Yeah, so it's a dance. So a little jig, like have you ever heard of like an Irish jig where people like move their feet around really, really quickly? Okay, so a jig is kind of like a dance, just like Dalton just said. And so the way I like to remember this is Japan, Italy, Germany. J-I-G, jig. They thought they would just dance their way up to the top, like world domination. Like when we think of like a Marvel supervillain, they're like, yes, world domination, I'm gonna take over everything. So these men attempted to take over surrounding countries and neighboring nations by taking like the land around Germany and conquering it, or the land around Italy, or the land around Japan. And they were attempting to go from nation to nation surrounding them and just take over them one by one. And they thought they could just skip their way up to the top and have world domination, and everyone would think like they thought, and the world would look how they wanted it to look. Now, the Allies being the other party, you have the Axis powers and the Allied powers, and we're gonna talk more about those later, so you don't need to write that down or anything, stepped in to stop them. But they thought they could just dance their way to the top, you know, jig all the way up, right? So everyone say jig. So Japan, Italy, Germany. Number two, fascism and totalitarian dictatorship. So, I myself did not know what fascism was until I studied World War II. Like many of you guys are probably wondering what that means. So when we think about fascism, I put this up here for you guys. So fascism, what is that? It's a really good question. So, it's a political philosophy, and a philosophy means an idea, okay, featuring these things. So a philosophy is something that you believe that impacts the way that you act, treat people, and the way that you do life, right? And so when we think of a philosophy, like for instance, teachers have a philosophy and it impacts the way that they teach. And so the things that they believe change their actions, the way that they say, the way that they speak to people and stuff like that. So when we think about a philosophy, considering fascism, that involves things like a strong central government that has total control over everything, total control over the economy, over the military, over everything, right? And so then we have headed by a dictator, which is along the same line. You know, when you have full and total control, someone has to be in control, right? And so that one man has full control over the government, or that one woman has full control over the government at all times. And so everything that they want happens. They're in full control, they are the head honcho, and no one's gonna tell them no. That's what being a dictator means, right? So here in America, we have a democracy, and we elect people into office to make decisions for us, but they also have checks and balances. So like, when we're thinking about electing an official, we don't have to worry about them taking over fully, because we know there's someone else in the government, and it's their job to tap the brakes and to keep them from having full and total control, right? So the president, although important, doesn't have unlimited power. He has to go through Congress, right? And so, not one man has full and total control, but in a dictatorship, that is what's happening. So one person, what they say goes, and no one questions them, right? And so, we have headed by a dictator under fascism, right? And it's a single party system. We have a two-party system, multi-party system here in America. So we have like, give me 1 second, Sophia. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have other parties, right? But here under a fascist rule, there's gonna be one central party with one idea and one way of doing things, and no one has a choice, right? This also involves, 1 second guys, do you have a question, Sophia, before I move on?
So pretty much the president is just there to be there, so like, so everyone thinks that it's something that happens all the president and not.
Yeah, for sure. So when we think about the Great Depression, right, even though other people were affecting the Great Depression, everyone blamed Hoover, right, because he was like the one figurehead, but because he didn't have full total control, he wasn't the only one, you know, messing up the system, right? So that's a great point, thank you. So then underneath fascism, when we think about strong central government and all of these things, the people who are in power like the dictators and the people who are leading the charge, doing everything, and no one's gonna tell them no, they're operating under a philosophy or a mindset that involves racism and discrimination. Okay, so when we think about, there are other countries that are doing this, right? We have Japan and Italy, but when we think about World War II, often we think about Germany. We think about Adolf Hitler, right? And so the people who are heading up these fascist dictatorships, right, they're operating under the mindset that there's one specific people group that is the favored people group, and anyone that doesn't fall into that category, or anyone who doesn't look like them, talk like them, act like them, is less than, or is less important, or is less human, right? And so when we think about this, we think about in Germany. In the video, we discussed how Adolf Hitler believed that white Germans were superior to every other person in the country, right? So this targeted and negatively impacted all minority groups, right? No matter who it was, anyone that didn't look and act how they thought that they should was being targeted and was being oppressed and discriminated against because of that. And that is often found in fascist dictatorships, right? And then we have strict economic control, terror, and aggressive nationalism. So that is like an extreme level of pride about your country. That's what nationalism is, okay? So when we think about these fascist leaders, like I said, it wasn't just Adolf Hitler, it was Benito Mussolini and Hidetoyo, right? So these are our three guys, the big three over here, and these are our Axis powers. We're gonna talk about the difference between the Axis powers and the Allied powers tomorrow. So hang tight on that. So what I do know is in the last few minutes, we've talked about a couple of vocabulary words you guys probably aren't familiar with, and that's okay. So I didn't know about some of these words until I started studying World War II. So what I wanted to do for you guys is if you go to slide 5, I have a vocabulary list here for you guys to start writing out in the definitions of some of these words, so that throughout the unit, we can come to know these words and be familiar with them, so that when we have discussions, then we don't have to stop and think about what these words mean. Kind of like you have to learn a language before you can have a conversation in it. Since we're gonna be having conversations about a lot of these topics and a lot of these concepts, I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to write down the definition so that you can reference it later in the unit as we go. So we're not gonna worry about isolationism right now. And we're going to talk about appeasement in a second, because I think I actually missed, I'm so sorry about that, I didn't mean to move on just yet. We talked about fascism and totalitarian dictatorship. I'm gonna get back to the word totalitarianism in 1 second, but before we do that, we're gonna talk about appeasement. That was the third political cause. Long story short, have you guys ever heard of the book When You Give a Mouse a Cookie?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. When you give a mouse a cookie, he's gonna ask for some milk. When you give a mouse a cookie, he's gonna ask for a napkin. I think that's how it goes, right? So appeasement, the best way I can describe it, is when someone's asking for something over and over and over again, and you appease them by giving them what they want so they stop asking you for it. So Hitler really, really wanted to take over all these neighboring nations, but what ended up happening was Great Britain was freaked out by this, and France was freaked out by that, so they're like, you know what we're gonna do? We're just gonna appease him, we're gonna make him happy, we're gonna give him a little piece of Czechoslovakia. Okay, so like, we're gonna give him a cookie, right? They're like, hey, you can take this little piece of Czechoslovakia, and they already speak German. It was a small neighborhood in Czechoslovakia that spoke German, right? So they appeased him. You can go to that one. They appeased him by giving him what he wanted, right? And so that's what that means. It's like your younger sibling, like pestering you about something for so long, you just give them what they want to make them be quiet. You know, that's basically what appeasement is. And so we'll talk about that more in a couple of days. So we're gonna put a pin in that. Yes, Bryson.
France didn't really last long.
No, they didn't. If you know anything about World War II, appeasement didn't really work.
I think it
You
was
know.
around 1940 they had to.
Yeah, I think you're right. So Bryson's talking about how France got taken over eventually by Nazi Germany, right? So appeasement didn't work very well, but we're gonna talk about that later, but you are right. So, appeasement being our third one. Before we move on to our vocabulary list, sorry for getting ahead of myself, I wanna go through our 3 causes. So, I'm gonna have you say this back to me. Conquest of neighboring nations. Yeah, you got it. And then we can say jig, right? Alright, I know y'all can do better than that. Conquest of neighboring nations. There you got it, by jig. Yeah, okay, and then we're gonna do number 2, fascism. And number 3, appeasement. Okay, and we're gonna get into those more specifically another day. Today is just an overview. So we're talking about some of these words we don't quite understand. We're gonna get to isolationism tomorrow. So y'all don't worry about isolationism right now. Appeasement, we just talked about it, so we're gonna give a brief description and definition. I'm gonna type on this desk up here if that's okay. Elena, can I crowd your space? Alright, so we talk about appeasement, right? We talk about, let's just say, giving a little in an attempt to avoid conflict. Okay, so appeasement, we're gonna say giving a little to avoid conflict, which is what Great Britain and France did, right? They were giving Germany a little bit of what they wanted to make them happy, thinking it would avoid the war, right? You're gonna wanna document these. Alright. Oh, it's not typing? Whoops. That's my bean. Okay, I'm gonna type up here. Alright, there we go. Giving a little to avoid conflict. Alright. Number 2, fascism. Can anyone give me a brief description of fascism after we talked about it? No? Alright, so fascism is essentially a strong central government. So it's an idea, maybe let's say that. Let's say it's an idea involving a strong central government sorry guys, it's hard to type on this government. Let's say including discrimination, dictatorship, and economic control. So that's a lot, but like I said before, this is gonna be better if it's written in your words, because if you're looking back on this in a couple days, and you're like, I wonder what appeasement means. You know, you're confused about it. It's better if it's written in your words, because you're gonna understand your words better than you'll understand mine, right? So I want you guys, as you've learned these things and you've heard these definitions, take what you think about the word and I want you to put that down. So depression, y'all know about an economic depression from the last unit. So that's when a market crashes. We're gonna put like a comma, unemployment, inflation. And maybe just say like an unhealthy economy. So that's when the economy is sick, right? It's not doing well, it's not functioning the way it's supposed to. And that's what we mean by an economic depression. And I told you we'd come back to totalitarianism, right? And so when we think about totalitarianism, alright, I'm gonna do this so y'all can hear me better in the back. When we think about totalitarianism, it's essentially total control, right? So totalitarianism is a really long word, it's a mouthful, but it starts with the word total. T-O-T-A-L, okay? So when we think about that, we can think about totalitarianism being total control. So when we have a dictator, they have total control over everything all the time. So totalitarianism is when one person has control over everything. We're gonna write one person or group has total control. And that's a short little way to describe it, and we're gonna get more in depth on this later. So we're gonna discuss it more, and you guys will have a better rounded, like a better well-rounded definition of it in the next few days. But for now, that's enough. So you guys can look at this for like another 20 seconds or so. If you don't get everything, that's okay. Because I want y'all to be writing these in your own words and your own definitions anyway. So later today, if you didn't get any of these written down fully, that's all right. I want y'all to document it in your own words, okay? So, did someone give me a time check? What time is it? Okay, great. We have so much time. All right, so what we're gonna do next is we are going to apply what we've learned today, and we're gonna do a drag and drop activity. So here we have a word bank of a bunch of words, and also in here before we get started, let me see here. The word isolationism is in your word bank. Isolationism is when a country is avoiding getting involved in war, so they isolate themselves. And that's what the United States did in World War II at first. So we're gonna talk about that tomorrow. But that word's in here and I didn't want it to throw you guys for a loop. So isolationism is I'm gonna just tell you, it's gonna be in the political category, because it's a political act where you politically remove yourself from the situation and you isolate yourself to avoid being in the conflict. So, I'll give y'all a freebie here. Isolationism is gonna go over here. Some of you might have a problem where your word is going behind the color in the box when you get started. So if you guys are having issues with that, remember you can change the fill color to transparent if your words aren't showing up. So I'm gonna do that preemptively on mine. So I'm just gonna change the fill color to transparent so you can see your words. So I want y'all to take the next, let's just say 3-4 minutes. And I want you guys to take your words in your word bank and drag and drop them into their proper category, right? We have political causes of World War II, and then we have economic causes of World War II. And I want you guys to organize them on your own. Do your best to not look at the previous slide. I want you guys to see what you know off the top of your head, and then we're gonna go over the answers to get all the correct answers when we're done. So if you get something wrong, it's all right, and we'll fix it and we'll get all the right answers. So do your best to do it by memory and just see what you can sort out on your own. You got about 3 minutes.
What do I do? It's not showing.
Is it right behind the color?
So you're just gonna, is it behind the color?
I think you got it. It's showing up.
I have no idea. Can you show them how to fix the color?
I need you to work here.
No.
I'm gonna like bring it forward.
You guys can see words are talking words.
What's up? When did you come back? Got a whole bunch of flags.
What are you confused about?
What's wrong?
Alright guys, work independently on your own.
Well, if you get this done, then I'll erase it and I'll help you with that one, okay?
Because there's like a bunch of layers. You gotta spam it.
Alright, you good?
You're okay. So we talked about these people, right? We talked about the outfit. He's a guy. And they're political leaders. Yeah, just like the president. So if you want to
Go back to work, Chris. You gotta work together, drag it out.
You're like, you got me.
yeah, you can draw it in there, it said political leaders. Okay, we're gonna go up here, change the fill color, transparent.
You having the same problem? I got you. Put it back. Would you all be okay if we review the answers in like 2 minutes?
No,
Does that give you enough time? Alright, keep going, Chris. You have a lot left.
You haven't even done it yet. Why don't you go ahead and do them?
Miss Carter,
Yes.
can you explain about the colors? Cause
Uh-huh.
I don't know how
Yeah,
to
that's
fix
okay.
that.
There you go. So if you guys are having problems putting your words in the boxes because the words disappear behind the color, if you go like this, so I'm gonna back it up here. If it looks like this and your words are like disappearing
Yes.
behind the green, mine didn't, but you know what I mean. If you want to go ahead and select the text box, so all the blue, and then you change this fill color, that little paint bucket, and say transparent, the color will go away and you'll be able to see your words again.
I know another way.
So hit transparent and you won't have that problem anymore. Got it?
I know another way.
Yeah, and you guys can put it to the back, but this is just easier.
Mine only did it twice.
Alright, keep working on your sorting.
Did you get it? Okay, good.
Great.
Michael, can I have Chris Fox to the office a moment?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll have you work on it later and we'll get you all sorted out with the right answers.
You good? Okay.
Alright, guys. I think we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna sort out these right answers. Say it's cool? Say it's cool.
It's cool.
It's cool. Okay. So I already organized isolationism over here into the political category. And when I was giving you guys an example, I dragged appeasement into economic, but it's not an economic cause. I was just showing y'all how to do it. Okay. So as I'm doing this, if you guys need to change your answers or you need to fix something, please do, because when you turn your digital notebook in, at the end of the unit, I want you to have all the right answers. Sidebar, if you need to turn in your digital notebook from last unit, the Great Depression, they need to be in by 7th period today. So, if y'all wanna go ahead and you wanna work on those in Excel today, I think that'd be a good use of your time. Alright, back to the present. Alright, we're gonna go through here, we're gonna start sorting these out. Can anyone tell me where appeasement goes? Yes, then. Oh, no, it's not economic, sorry. I put it in economic just to show you guys the color organization, but it actually is gonna be a political issue. So, politics and the government, when they're trying to, you know, give Hitler a cookie to keep him away, right, they gave him Czechoslovakia to appease him. And so that's a political issue, because the political leaders decided to do that to keep him at bay, okay? What about Benito Mussolini? Political, you're correct. Alright, he is a political leader. He is the fascist dictator in Italy, and he is a political leader in Italy. So therefore, he was a political issue, okay? What about unemployment? Economic, you're correct. Alright, so unemployment is when people don't have enough jobs, and that's affected by an economic depression, and that's what causes that, okay? What about fascism?
Political.
It is gonna be political, actually. So, fascism is a political ideology. Can everyone say ideology? Yeah, so an ideology is an idea. Those two words kind of sound similar, right? Ideology. And that's basically when you think a certain way and you have a certain opinion and it impacts the way that you treat people, the way that you do your job, stuff like that. So fascism impacted the way that the government treated people and the way that it essentially affected World War II. So, Adolf Hitler, can you tell me where he goes? Political, you're right. Just like Benito Mussolini and his dictatorship, he is a political leader. So I just gave you an answer. Can anyone tell me where he goes? The dictatorship? Economics? It's not. He is actually a political leader. So he's gonna go down here. Oh, you're good. So he's a political leader, and so that's where he's gonna go. What about high inflation? Economics? You're right. So inflation is when there's too much money in the system, and the money becomes worthless because there's too much of it, right? So when everyone has money, the money's not worth as much, and that's what inflation is. So prices go up, things like that. What about dictators?
That is blue.
That is political, yeah. And if you guys still have your colors, that would be the blue category. Okay. What about worldwide depression? Economics. Yes, sir. All right. So worldwide depression, talking economic depression when the market crashes, things like that. What about German World War I debt? Or that's supposed to be World War II. That's a typo. I apologize. If you guys want to go ahead and just type in there another capital I, it will change that. That was my mistake. World War II is what that's supposed to say. And WW, 2 capital I's. The 2 capital I's are Roman numerals for 2. And so that's how you're going to see it written oftentimes, is WWII, or they can look like L's sometimes. And that means 2, so it's World War II. Yeah? Alright, so German World War II debt, you can go in economic. And that is an economic downturn and depression that was caused by the Treaty of Versailles. Yeah? And so it's an economic issue that turned into a political one, but it was economic right off the bat. Does anyone have any questions about where any of these go? Nope. Everyone give me a thumbs up? Cool? Cool with it? Alright, awesome.
Hey, where do we go?
So it's 38. Okay, great. You guys have a perfect amount of time to complete your exit ticket. So I want y'all to move on to slide 8. Hang with me. We only have a couple minutes. So slide 8 has what is called an exit ticket on there. Do y'all know what that is?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Exit ticket is something that you complete to like gather your thoughts after you learn something on your way out the door. So until you're dismissed, I want y'all to stay at your seat and I want you to work on this. So the directions say, complete both parts of the following exit ticket question. Below using at least 3 8th grade sentences, 8 words per sentence. So y'all know what an 8th grade sentence is, right? Okay, an 8th grade sentence is when you use 8 words. Okay? At least 3 8th grade sentences. Okay, you're gonna answer this question and give 2 examples, okay? Considering the economic, up here guys, considering the economic and political causes for World War II, which do you think was the most influential in starting the conflict? Explain why using 2 specific examples. So, is the economic cause, or the economic causes, or the political causes more important? Which of those 2 categories do you think had the biggest impact in starting World War II? So do you think it was more the political people, or do you think it was more of the economic influences that started World War II? Okay, so that's sentence number 1, okay? We're gonna say like, what was the most important So that would mean you're writing something along the lines of, I think that the economic causes are more important because, and then you're gonna give 2 sentences, giving 2 specific examples from your notes. Huh?
I was giving the most important.
Yeah, so whichever one you think is the most important. And then you're gonna give 2 examples. Example 1 and example 2. And I want you guys to write full sentences, 8th grade sentences, meaning 8 words per sentence. And I want you guys to elaborate on this. And we talked about all of it. Y'all sit and work on that. Flag me down if you have questions. I'm gonna be walking around, okay? Also, if you don't get done in class, that's okay. Work on this in Excel or in Connections tomorrow. And we're gonna be reviewing and like discussing this at the beginning of class tomorrow as a warm-up. Let's see.
Are we gonna get our 2 rows of stamps?
So if y'all keep doing really well, I'll give you guys your 2 rows of stamps, so keep that in mind. Keep working till the bell.
Wait, I just took the yellow one.
Working on this, I'll get this sorted out tomorrow.
Wait, what about the, I got some, I actually got stamps.